It all started with a phone call that should have sent shockwaves through the halls of power in Tallahassee. On February 15, 2025, a panicked tourism executive in Tampa realized the unthinkable had happened. The Canadians were gone. Not just a few, but what felt like all of them. This wasn't the result of a hurricane or recession. This was a self-inflicted wound, a completely avoidable catastrophe brought on by 6 months of political posturing and hostile rhetoric. The state that had built its entire winter economy on the reliable migration of its northern neighbors had, with breathtaking speed, managed to sever a relationship that had been profitable for decades. This was, in essence, an economic suicide mission, and the politicians held the detonator. The exodus didn't happen overnight, but it might as well have. It began as a trickle of whispers and canceled reservations, what initially appeared to be isolated decisions by individual families to sell their condos or terminate their rental agreements. Canadian seasonal residents, affectionately known as Snowbirds, were not just taking a brief hiatus from the Sunshine State, they were initiating a permanent, messy divorce, and taking their substantial spending power with them to friendlier shores. The warning signs were impossible to miss for anyone who cared to look. By January 2025, the data was already painting a grim picture. Advance rental bookings from Canadian travelers had plummeted by over 30%. Online searches for Florida properties from Canadian IP addresses were down a staggering 45%. Airline reservations for the crucial winter season had cratered by nearly 40%. When you peel back the layers of political rhetoric, $6.6 billion in annual spending by Canadian visitors vanished in less than a year. Graphic pop. 72% drop in bookings. Graphic pop. 30% property value crash. This wasn't just a minor dip in tourism, it was the complete evaporation of a foundational revenue stream. Think of it as a major corporation suddenly losing its largest and most reliable client, not due to market forces, but because the CEO decided to publicly insult them. The direct financial hit was immediate and brutal, impacting everything from sales tax collections. An estimated $2.1 billion in property tax revenue was suddenly at risk, threatening the funding for essential public services like schools, fire departments, and road maintenance. At the same time, the winter employment market, which traditionally swelled to accommodate the influx of seasonal visitors, collapsed. Medical centers reported revenue drops of up to 60%. Contractors reported revenue losses exceeding 70%. Regional airports struggled with massive excess capacity. The entire logistics network that had been so finely tuned to support seasonal tourism was unraveling. This wasn't a slow-moving economic decline, it was a sudden, sharp shock to the system. One of the most critical errors made by Florida's political leadership: not all tourists are the same. They assumed a lost Canadian dollar could be replaced by an American one. The Canadian snowbird is not your average tourist. They stay for months and spend differently. The average Canadian seasonal household spends approximately $33,000 over the course of a 6-month stay. The average domestic tourist spends around $1,200. To replace the economic impact of just one Canadian household, Florida would need to attract nearly 28 American families. Beyond raw spending, snowbirds pay property taxes, hire pool cleaners and landscapers, and invest in renovations. Their presence smoothed out seasonal volatility and kept restaurants and shops open year-round. By driving them away, Florida's politicians didn't just lose tourists, they destroyed the foundation of their off-season economy. The economic devastation wrought by the Canadian exodus wasn't confined to beachside souvenir shops and hotels. Specialty clinics, particularly in counties with high concentrations of seasonal residents, had long relied on Canadian snowbirds as a predictable and profitable patient base. These were individuals who would plan their winters around necessary medical procedures: knee replacements, cataract surgeries, dental work. Medical centers reported revenue drops of up to 60% as their patient volumes cratered. The ripple effect meant layoffs for nurses, technicians, and administrative staff. The construction and home maintenance industries were similarly decimated. Contractors reported revenue losses exceeding 70% as long-term maintenance contracts were terminated. Regional airports designed around seasonal charter flights were suddenly struggling with massive excess capacity. Airlines were forced to slash routes by as much as 40% due to the collapse in demand, turning once bustling terminals into echo-filled halls. Car rental agencies were stuck with thousands of idle vehicles. The intricate logistics network that had been built to support seasonal tourism was now a stranded asset, a costly monument to a vanished customer base. The tragic irony of Florida's economic collapse is that it was entirely preventable. The decision to alienate their most valuable tourist demographic was a conscious one, driven by a desire for short-term political gains at the expense of long-term economic stability. New regulations were introduced, including requirements for extensive background checks and fingerprinting for Canadians planning to stay longer than 30 days, transforming a simple winter getaway into a bureaucratic ordeal. This was accompanied by a steady drumbeat of anti-Canadian rhetoric and thinly veiled threats about foreign property ownership. As tourism boards and industry leaders privately sounded the alarm, the governor's office and legislative leaders publicly doubled down. They dismissed the economic warnings as fear-mongering, and continued to champion their America First tourism strategy. Leaked internal documents later revealed the profound disconnect between the private panic and the public posturing. For the sake of short-term political survival, the leadership chose to maintain a course that guaranteed long-term economic ruin. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the international tourism market. The $6.6 billion that vanished from Florida's economy didn't disappear, it migrated. Portugal, in particular, launched a targeted campaign at disgruntled Canadian snowbirds. Mexico streamlined visa processes. Coastal communities like the Riviera Maya began marketing themselves as new winter havens. Caribbean nations coordinated campaigns emphasizing political stability and hospitality. They highlighted English language services, quality private healthcare, and stable governments. Every dollar a Canadian spent building a new winter life in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean was a dollar permanently lost to Florida. The most visible scar left by the Canadian exodus was on Florida's real estate market. Real estate brokers found their phones ringing off the hook, with sellers, not buyers. With a massive surge in supply and a simultaneous collapse in demand, property values in heavily seasonal areas plummeted by as much as 30%. Condominiums purchased specifically for the snowbird market became virtually worthless overnight. The strip malls, restaurants, and entertainment venues that relied on seasonal communities suddenly lost their economic foundation. Lease defaults surged and small businesses closed permanently rather than operate at unsustainable capacity. Communities that once buzzed from November through March were now eerily quiet, the social fabric torn apart. Rebuilding the trust and economic relationships that were destroyed will not be a matter of simply flipping a switch or issuing a public apology. Regional airports, sprawling condo complexes, and service networks represent massive stranded assets that cannot be easily repurposed. Rebuilding trust is infinitely harder than destroying it. Economic relationships built over decades are founded on predictability and stability. International investors now view Florida through a lens of heightened political risk. The message has been sent globally that Florida's political system can turn on its partners overnight. The Sunshine State chose to defy economic laws, and now it is paying the steep price. The economy always keeps score. Is this a lesson for other states? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.